Welcome to this session of the Lifelong Learning Weeks on assessment and on various aspects of mostly formative assessment to differentiate learning. My name is Alice Modena. I am Professional Development Coordinator at Euroclio, and I will not be hosting today's panel, but I have helped putting together the panelists, and I have the pleasure of sharing a couple of housekeeping announcements and then leading us into the first icebreaker part of the day, and then away our panelists will go with the discussion. So housekeeping announcements, it's very, very, by now, obvious to all of us. I would just like to ask you to stay muted during the presentations for today, if you can, to turn on your video, because it's nicer for us or for the speakers to see who they are talking with. I believe it was one of the Lifelong Learning Platform organized trainings on online facilitation that someone said, imagine you're blindfolded and giving a presentation. If your video is off, this is how the speaker feels. And I think it's a very apt image. There will be a moment for everyone to interact, both at the beginning in breakout rooms and at the end with a Q&A session. And so, yeah, we will have the possibility to speak and hear your voice and hear your thoughts. And we're very much looking forward to it. That's it for the housekeeping announcements. Before I leave, I give the floor to Ute, who will be our moderator today. I would like to ask you to help us map where we are connecting from. I have shared in the chat the link to a Padlet. I see that there's a new person that just joined us, so I will share it again. You should be able to enter the Padlet. Please, someone nod if you are able to enter the Padlet. Great. You should be able to enter the Padlet, and you should have the possibility to drop a pin with where you are connecting from on our Padlet. If you are having any troubles with it, first of all, I am going to share my screen and show you how to do that. This goes away. You click here on the top right corner of the screen on the plus, and you search for where you are. So I'm in The Hague, and I am just going to pin myself in The Hague and then go much further, because I know for a fact that not everyone is connecting from the Netherlands. So this is where we are. I see slowly pins coming. There's someone in Turin. Nice. There's someone in Nicosia and two people from Nicosia. We have Stockholm. It's very exciting to see the map slowly filling in. I know for a fact that we also do have speakers from Australia, so I will also keep the video a little bit big. The Padlet will remain open throughout the session. I will also share again the link in a while, so that if we have late arrivals, they have access to it as well. And yeah, I will extract a PDF with it and share a nice map with Andrea, who will share it with all of you next week. But it's so great to see so many participants from all over Europe and beyond. The and beyond part being very important. Thank you for making the time to being with us today. I will now stop sharing my screen and enter into the topic of our session today. Today we're talking about assessment. We're talking about assessments from various different angles. And I myself am not an assessment expert, so I will not be talking about assessment with you. But I know that most of you who are connected today have had some experience with assessment. You've had some experience with good assessment, with bad assessment, with giving assessment, with receiving assessment, probably a mixture of all of these. And so what we would like to do before starting the panel discussion is we would like to collect a little bit your experience. to do so, I would like to give the floor to Ute, who will explain the task much better than what I can do. Ute is an ambassador at Euroclio and also a member of the Euroclio board and will be our moderator today. Ute, you have the floor. I'll get the link.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's lovely to see you all in that panel discussion today on, well, the topic is using formative assessment to personalize the learning process, right? And we thought in order to break the ice a little bit, we're gonna give the members of this webinar a chance to share their best or some good and very bad assessment examples that you experienced or that you received, that you did in our next Padlet in breakout rooms. And the idea is also to, first of all, to start a dialogue between those who are attending, but also to get already some really good examples, because as we also wrote at the introductory part, we will collect this information because we want to also give out some advice and some good ideas that you can take home after this webinar. So I think we should then start with the second Padlet. Okay, so great. So you can see the link is in the chat box, and then I think we will start also our breakout rooms, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yeah.
So our breakout room is done. So we had some really interesting, in my breakout room, we had some very interesting conversations, and I think we didn't really manage to add some of the comments that we had in our Padlet. So I think if you can, maybe at a later stage, maybe we can leave the link of the Padlet open for a little bit longer, so just in case people remember what they wanted to say, or they can just add a few more ideas. So what I'd like to do is now I'd like to introduce our three speakers, our three panelists. Before that, I just want to go back again to briefly say what this panel discussion is about. So it's really about how formative assessment can become a tool to improve and personalize the learning process. So and showing how formative assessment is, or can be, or should be an interaction between students and teachers, a conversation. And I think Marty's book is also very interesting, because she's later on probably talking also about the book, which is dealing, or the topic is about assessment as dialogue. And I would like, so our three speakers are Marty Domokos, then we have also Bhavani Sritaharan. I hope I pronounced your name properly. I will try again later on. And then Arya Krauchenberg. So I would like to start introducing Marty. Marty grew up in Hungary and became an adult in the Netherlands. She has an MA in English and book and publishing studies from Leiden University. She started developing an interest in education while choosing a school for their eldest of 4 children. They chose the Steiner Waldorf education, and from then on, Marty has been involved in many of its aspects, challenges, and beauties. She's the coordinator of the European network of Steiner Waldorf parents. She works at a school and as a project coordinator for the European Council for Steiner Waldorf Education, and is a member of the board of the Hungarian Waldorf Federation. Her main interests are in education, and they grew initially out of being a parent. And one of these is the use of all kinds of media and digitalization in education. The other is the use of formative and personalized assessment methods throughout a child's or young person's school career. Her 4 children are now at university, but her interest in these topics has not waned. She has been the coordinator of an Erasmus Plus project on collecting good assessment practices, from which one of the tangible results is the book Assessment as Dialogue. She was also instrumental in the group working on digital culture and as part of the Hungarian Waldorf curriculum, and is now the coordinator of a proposed Europe-wide project on development-oriented and age-appropriate approach to ICT and media education. Marty spends considerable time behind computer screens, but is searching for ways of balancing this with live meetings, long talks with a partner, children and friends, reading, gardening and cycling. So we agreed that each panelist would spend around 10 minutes in presenting their ideas. And Marty will be talking about assessment without grades. So after 9 minutes, I will make an announcement that you have 1 minute left, if that's okay. Okay, Marty, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ute. I really like this. I didn't know I would be introduced this extensively, but it's wonderful because this is also this personalized part of every talk, and I really like that. So I'm not going to introduce myself, that has been done. I would just like to stress again that I got into this whole topic of assessment by being a parent. But that won't be the focus of my 10 minutes now, because Arya will focus, with whom I also work on parents' issues together. And so I'm just going to show today this book to you that we realized within this Erasmus Plus project, and would like to give you a glimpse into the facts that there are interesting and exciting assessment methods out in the field of education. Some 5 years ago, I was asked to join a group of a European group. It was kind of a talking group on the topic of assessment. And I got into that as well through being the coordinator of the European network of Steiner Waldorf parents. And they wanted to bring into the group the parents' point of view. And we had lots of wonderful meetings. We discussed a lot about assessment, and everyone agreed that something should change to bring more formative and personalized aspects into assessment. But then I'm a very practical person, and some of us started asking, okay, we talked now, we see the need, so what are we going to do? And from that point, when we started thinking, we also got some input a few years ago from the Director General of Education and Culture at the European Commission, that if we wanted to talk about different types of assessment, and we are convinced that there are different types of assessment, then we should collect good practices. So that's why we wrote an Erasmus Plus project. We got the funds, and through lots of administrative swamps and COVID regulations and wonderful meetings and an enormous labor of love, we finally have our collection. This is the book that we produced. I will show it to you from the inside in a moment with the screen sharing as well. But I just wanted to show you the physical book as well. It started out as a little leaflet of 100 pages when we planned it, and now it is a book of 300 pages. And not because we want to talk a lot. I do talk a lot, but because those practices that are put into, they just couldn't be shortened. If you read them, they are little wonders, all of them. And I will share with you some contents from the book. And that is not because I want to sell the book, because this book is not for sale. I will share the links. This is an open resource. I will share the link with you through Andrea, how you can get to this. And the teachers who contributed to this book took the time and effort and to look at every child, every individual child, and try to understand what is unique in them as a person. And this uniqueness cannot be, and they showed that this uniqueness cannot be generalized, standardized, or measured. So now I'm going to share my screen with you. So yes, it's okay. So this is our book, and it is called assessment as dialogue, 20 inspiring practices from classrooms and schools across Europe. It is collected from 12 countries, and it was put together by the Learning for Wellbeing Foundation, the European Council for Steiner Waldorf Education, and the Hungarian Waldorf Federation. I will just try to show you a few things. First of all, we put it into 5 sections, these 20 practices. The one was when the child enters school from kindergarten. The other part is the primary school period. Then this part where bridging primary and secondary school, also because primary and secondary education ends and starts at different times in European countries. Then we have the secondary school and the leaving school. We also have a wonderful poem by permission of Brian Patton, the Minister for Exams, and I won't have time to read that now, but please, if you do have a chance, then take the effort and read that. Then I'm just not going through it all. We also kind of summarize what assessment is in an assessment flowers, and in an introduction we talk a lot about how the book came about and what we found out in the field. And just let's see, and we also have let's see, no, it's a bit further, I forgot to note this page. Yes, there is also a summary what assessment is and what types of assessment are available or are identified by us. And this was done by a colleague of mine, Martin Rosen, who writes a lot about formative assessment. Then I would love to show the whole book, but tomorrow at 10, there is the official launch of this book at the QOC talk, the Quality of Childhood talk within the Lifelong Learning Week. So if you would like to know more about it and see, meet the team and some of the teachers who contributed to the book, you can join us tomorrow at 10. However, because I still have a few minutes, I guess, I will show you 2 practices, and not the practices themselves, but how we set it up. So one is one from a primary school, and it is called Hand in Hand, Cooperation between a Teacher and Parents in Assessment. And I think it in a very loving manner showcases how teachers and parents can indeed cooperate when looking at a child, and not just look at the child from one point of view, but as a kind of circle around the child. And with every practice, we first have a little summary, then we introduce the school itself, and then we have something that we call an identity card. And within that identity card, we also mention what type of assessments are to be found in this practice. So like this one is a formative, ipsative, and collaborative practice. And why I chose to show this to you is also a nice tie-in for Arya's talk in a few minutes. And then we show the teacher, and then the practice itself. And if it's in any way possible, here it wasn't, we also add feedbacks from other pupils and from parents in our practices, how they experience this. Then I just show you another one, and now I'm starting on my last minute. And that is the one that we showed at a Euroclio event already in the summer. And I chose this again because this is really tied to history and shows how through a game history lessons at the secondary school can be assessed. And I chose this title because of the history element, and also because in this practice there is a very, very strong element of peer assessment, self-assessment as well, formative, summative, peer and self-assessment. And I'm also going to close this now because this is a nice bridge to the next speaker, the peer assessment, but just finishing it with one sentence of my colleague Martin Rossen, who said, the most important factor in enhancing learning is teachers who are able to observe the effects of their teaching on their pupils and who can modify their approach to teaching based on these observations. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Marti. Actually, when we had our preparatory talk, I had also after our talk, I had a look at your book, and I find some of the suggestions, or all of the suggestions, are really, really interesting. And I think it can be a very, very helpful book for teachers, also for those who start their teaching practice, to get an idea of how actually formative assessment can be implemented in a number of activities. So that was a very interesting talk. Thank you very much. So we are going to our next panelist, and I have practiced the pronunciation of your name. I'm very sorry about that. So our next panelist is talking about peer assessment. And this is Dr. Bhavani Sridharan. Is that correct now?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so she's an associate dean for learning and teaching and accreditation for the Faculty of Law and Business at the Australian Catholic University. Dr. Sridharan has extensive transnational experience in working with many higher education business faculties, including in the India Institute of Management, or the Monash University, or the Australian Catholic University, where you are working right now. Her research interests are in assuring graduate capabilities, analytics, assessment, feedback, evaluative judgment, e-learning, technology-enhanced assessment, student engagement and retention, quality in higher education, and principles of responsible management education. She has published her work in higher-ranked peer-reviewed journals, for example, in higher education or in accounting education. Dr. Sridharan has been successful in gaining several research grants and research awards. Some of them, or one of them is, for example, the Massey University Women's Award, the research grant from the Academy of Business Research and Fund, and many, many more. The list is really long. So I'm really impressed. So I would like to give you the floor to talk about peer assessment.
Thank you so much, Uta. Very, very kind of you to give a very nice introduction. So I will share my screen so that I can start my presentation. Okay. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
I'm trying to see if I can. Submit this way. Okay. Know that Yuta has already introduced me. I just wanted to tell you this, even though this presentation is coming from higher education setting, all the learnings, all the points, principles, everything is applicable for school setting as well. I'm super excited to present my topic of enabling education for life and livelihood. It's basically peer assessment in teamwork context. I'm focusing very, very nuanced area, because this is an area where lot of challenges we are facing a lot of challenges. Even higher education teachers are facing so many challenges. I'm sure it would be much more for school education. I would be basically covering just basics, what it is, why we are doing this, and how are we going to meet the challenges and strategies. If you remember, I think I would like Andrea to share the polling questions. Can I stop sharing, Andrea?
Yes, sure.
Yeah, I will stop sharing so that you can quickly do some polling question. What I wanted to do was just some icebreaker question to get some ideas. If you want to see all 3 questions, you can expand it and then you can answer in one go. The first question is, which is the top in the list of 10 skills that employers most want in graduates based on recruiter surveys by Forbes in 2014? This is based on 2014. Can we move on to the next question? What percentage of employers who got fired due to lack of people skills versus lack of domain knowledge? How much of student success depends on soft skill versus domain skills? Can we end the poll, Andrea?
There are still a few votes that are coming in.
Yeah, okay.
They're all yours.
Okay, thank you. I will start sharing my. Do you want me to share the results? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Stop sharing. I will start my. Okay, to answer the results indicated, the topmost in the list was ability to work in teams. For the second question, it was the option of 80-20. People, recruiters, employers felt 80% of people skill and 20% of subject knowledge. That was, why people got fired, because lack of people skill or emotional skill. Third question was around student success depends on, this is based on student survey. It is, to be specific, it was 87.5% of soft skill and 12.5% of subject knowledge to succeed in student success depends on this. This basically tells us something very, very, the moral of the story is that we need to focus a lot more on emotional intelligence or soft skills because the world is the dynamics, new dynamics, and the uncertain world demands students need to develop much more than domain knowledge or subject knowledge. This basically we have to reflect and see, ask the simple question: what percentage of our learning activities centered around building soft skills? That's something we need to think about it. I can tell you from my own experience, we are doing very little compared to what is expected by employers, by the key stakeholders. To start with, peer assessment is something that is the assessment of students' work by other students of equal status. There are a number of benefits from peer assessment. It develops metacognitive skill, awareness, self-awareness skills, which is so important, that needs to be developed at a very young age. And it engages students by giving the power to judge others' work. The other gamut or range of skills that can be developed through this exercise is critical thinking, judgment skills, and other soft skills. In fact, Kruger and Dunnings, they found a cognitive bias. They did an experiment. What they found was people who were incompetent not only performed poorly, but also overestimated this knowledge. Therefore, this tackles the biggest problem that not just young children, adults also face, is inability to recognize one's own ignorance. The peer assessment helps to achieve this. This is something lifelong learning that we all need to learn. It just never stops. And also peer assessment helps to become active agents in learning, because they take ownership in learning. So this is something, as Marty mentioned, it's really combines and makes them engage with the whole process of learning. There are two types of peer assessment. One is broadly classified. One is peer assessment of product, which is nothing but submission of students' work. The second one is the peer assessment of process. I'll be focusing more on peer assessment of process, because that is what is a challenging things that people are, educators are finding it very difficult, because it is multifaceted and multiple challenges are there, particularly in teamwork context. Why teamwork? Let me tell you what is teamwork anyway. Teamwork is, basically involves small group of students working together to achieve a common goal, right? So, but to tell why teamwork, because it is powerful in developing a range of soft skills. It could be global citizenship skill, it is empathy, stewardship, social intelligence, and so on. And many key stakeholders has told us that onus of developing the soft skill is on teachers. We have to prepare students for the dynamic and uncertain demands. In fact, Giuliani says our job is not to prepare students for something. We need to prepare themselves for anything. That's something so powerful. I see. Why peer assessment? Peer assessments are students are best positioned, especially in teamwork context, because they are working together. Teachers don't get to observe students. Therefore, peer assessment is great, especially in teamwork context. Teachers are not suited because they have limited vantage points. Why peer assessment of process in teamwork? Many key stakeholders have categorically and unequivocally highlighted that peer assessment of process is needed. For example, students have clearly told, please don't give us group work if you don't know how to assess individual contributions, because teamwork is kind of fraught with number of frustrations and challenges, such as free rider problem, sucker effect, mum effect, and so many other problems that are highlighted in the figure. Employers are saying, give us students who are good with both soft skill and hard skills. They expect hard skills because the disciplinary knowledge or it is assumed. So they expect us to give them students who can perform good at both soft and hard skills. And the quality assurance agencies are saying, provide us evidence at a granular level. They are saying students graduate as groups. They don't graduate as groups, but they graduate as individuals. So show us their performance at individual level. So peer assessment is able to meet these challenges. It could be a catalyst and a silver bullet to resolve so many of these issues. Just to give a roadmap, it's a peer assessment. There are a list of steps. These are something at a holistic level you could do, modify and introduce new elements. Staff basically do group formation, and then followed by assessment design, assessment and feedback literacy to students, teach them how to work as team, how to give feedback to peers and monitor them, their progress, and publish results. These are some of the simple steps from staff perspective. From students' perspective, the steps include, the first step I would always suggest is self-assessment, because this is very, very powerful to calibrate so that they can judge others' performance, peers' performance, followed by peer assessment, and then give feedback, constructive feedback. So they need to know how to give constructive feedback. There is feedback literacy is also critical here. And then review and act and reflect. In my recent example, I introduced one more step to that, that is feedback and feedback, so that they take ownership for giving feedback. Some of the key challenges for peer assessment are, the first challenge is engagement. This may not be a problem in a school setting, but in higher education setting, students engage only if it is counted towards, final grade. In other words, they think they don't take it seriously because they don't see direct return for their effort. The second issue is it sometimes can undermine the spirit of collaboration. Competition will kind of become overpowering if the assessment is not designed effectively. So assessment design is very, very important. We have done, so some of our research also highlights there are some capability concerns. Lack of understanding or common shared understanding of quality and standards by students may lead to poor validity and reliability could be a problem. The other one is evaluative judgment, which is very, very complex even for experienced people like, David Bowd and John Hattie. They all feel it's a complex thing. We need to teach them before we can ask them to do such activity. And then behavioral concerns. There are a number of behavioral concerns such as incentive to miss mark. If there is a popular student, students may tend to give higher marks. Or if they are vindictive, they may want to give lower marks. These are very, very critical things that we need to think about it, how to deal with it. Over generous mark, students don't want to lose their friends. Therefore, they would be generous in giving marks. And there could be sabotage. They want to overrate self and underrate peers. That could, advantage, to get advantage in terms of marking. So some of the strategies to deal with these problems are formative before summative is very critical. It has been proven feedback at the end of the semester or end of the term is too late. It's wasted time and effort. So we have to give formative, and these skills can be developed only over time. Therefore, we have to adopt a scaffolded approach where students get multiple exposure to formative assessment so that it gets kind of deep-rooted in their attitudes and values in doing this. Again, as I mentioned before, literacy is very important because teamwork, feedback literacy, these are all students, it doesn't come, it's not intuitive or it's not innate. Therefore, we need to take initiative to teach them how to work as a group and provide feedback and so on. There is a subtle difference between group work and teamwork. We should be focusing on teamwork, not group work. Group work is just allocating, you do question A, you do question B, you do question 3. There is no collaboration involved. Assessment should be designed in such a way that teamwork is embedded, where the whole is always greater than the sum of its parts. That in teamwork, students interact with each other. They brainstorm their ideas. They really, do so many, learn from each other. That is possible only through teamwork assessment, not group work. So important to keep in mind, assessment design is important. Peer assessment technology is important. 1 minute. Yeah.
1 minute.
Yeah, there are a lot of technologies available. We can, make use of it to make our lives easier. Our recent results indicated students are quite happy with this entire process. Most of them felt it had a significant impact on number of skills, as you can see from this diagram. And students have given some great comments. They felt they learned self-awareness, they learned teamwork skills. two key lessons learned from this exercise was they told us, please tell us if it is anonymous. Anonymous will help us to be honest in marking. Finally, teamwork training has also been highlighted by students. To conclude, we are going through a massive systemic transformation, and our education landscape is literally shifting in a big way. To be effective, we need to adapt to the changes. We need to, be effective in addressing the needs of the modern society, modern era. These are some references if you would like to look into it. And if you have, we can look at any questions. This is my email address. If you have any questions or anything, I'm happy to help you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bhavani. That was a really interesting talk. You managed to put a lot of information in a very concise manner. I really enjoyed some of your aspects, especially also talking about the challenges that I think me as a practitioner, as a teacher, I can see some of the challenges that you are mentioning also in my own class. So thank you very much for also referring to the challenges. So our last panelist is Arja Krauchenberg, and she will talk about the parents' involvement in assessment. Now, Arja Krauchenberg holds an NA in Romance Languages from Vienna University with a special focus on multilingualism, diversity, and interculturalism, and has also trained as a certified tourist guide. As a mother of three, Arja has lived abroad for almost 20 years and has been actively involved in parents, here's my alarm, in parents' representation in the schools attended by her children in different countries. And she has been over the years more and more involved in parents' representation, and she has been elected as a member of the board of the European Parents Association, where she also served as president between 2018 and 2019, and is also engaged as a project coordinator. She's also a member, I'm jumping a little bit because there are many things that are in your CV, but she's also a member from May 21, a member of the executive board of the European Food and Industry Council, which I find fascinating as well. Arja Krauchenberg advocates for a holistic and learner-centered approach in education. Formal, informal, and non-formal education should help learners to develop their full and unique potential. I would like to give the word to Arja Krauchenberg, and I'm looking forward to your contribution. You're welcome. The panel is yours, and I will silence myself.
Thank you very much, Ute, for this very comprehensive introduction. As Marti, I'm very happy that you said almost everything. So I can start immediately to share my presentation. As you have said, I represent here in this panel the European Parents Association. And as I'm not so sure whether everybody is so familiar with this organization, I will just briefly present ourselves. We are an organization, an umbrella organization that represents almost members from all over Europe. We have 35 members in 24 countries. Also, our board members come from 7 different countries that cover the north to the south and the east to the west. And our main objectives are, on the one hand, to represent parents on the European level, which means working with the European Commission, different Directorate Generals, the European Parliament, but also the Council of Europe. We also participate in different European projects. And of course, our core objective is to foster the exchange among our members, to make cooperation and exchange of experience possible, to disseminate good practice, and to support the creation of new national and regional parent representations all over Europe where they don't exist yet. Our core paradigm, we base our work on the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. And our main goal is to advocate for the recognition of parents as primary educators of their children. Now, primary for us does not only mean first chronologically, but also the most impacting and possibly the best. So that is something that is not always the case when we go out, that we find people saying, well, some parents do so much for their children and others don't. So there's never going to be equal opportunities for all. And we rather say, well, can we support the parents who are not able to support their children as well as others and give those children the same possibilities? How do we do that? I mean, we hold, in order to make our members meet and exchange, usually we hold 2 general assemblies per year. We're very happy that our last one was in presence just 2 weeks ago in Vilnius, Lithuania, with all the headache around the pandemic and the restrictions and all the things that you had to observe. But it went very well, and people were very happy to finally meet again after 2 years of only online meetings, presence, and webinars. Of course, the online webinars were also a chance to reach out to more parents that we usually get in touch with. So we have discovered that for us as a new possibility. As you can see, we are here part of the Lifelong Learning Week. So we are lifelong learners, of course, ourselves. So we have also learned a lot during this pandemic of how we can even better engage with our members. So these are a few of the things that we do to keep in touch. And now I would like to come to the question. So the parental view on assessment. I've tried to give you a few headlines that we have collected from parents on that topic. So of course, parents always want the best for their child. Yeah, they don't want the child to be stressed. Children should not feel anxious. And of course, they see formative assessment going into that direction. That would be, of course, something that would help to reduce stress and to reduce anxiety for many children. But there's a big but. If there are no tests, then how can children learn how to deal with stressful situations? Because future challenges are ahead. I mean, let's think about the pandemic, but climate change, the digitalization, all things that stress us as adults. So how can we make our children resilient? And some people think that by putting them to the test already at an early age, that will make them more resilient. Other parents are afraid that if there are no more grades, or if the grades are not given any longer in the way they are used to them, that would not give them any information of how their children are doing, because all this comparative aspect of the grades, if I don't know if there's a description on what my child is doing, how can I compare that to I don't know, my other family members' children or my colleagues' children at work, and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of anxiety also on the part of the parents, that things that they don't know how they will work will then have a negative effect. So they are in favor of summative assessment in grades. And the interesting point for me in these findings has always been that even parents who had very negative experiences with summative assessments, with exams and grading procedures themselves, they still want their children to go through this process because it's the only one they really know, and they're afraid of the unknown. So what we have found in parents' comments, that they don't have enough information of how such a system with more formative assessment could work. They think that the education system is not prepared for such a change, that there are different traditions in different countries, and that it's just part of the history and the tradition, and you have to accept. And very often they also think that this would not fit afterwards with higher education. Yeah? So if you talk to parents with school children, they think, yeah, but then how does that fit in with higher education? Will children then still have the same possibilities? They all agree that it would be less stressful for children. It would be more balanced than the summative assessment, and it would probably give more equitable opportunities for children. So if we talk about parental involvement or involvement of the learners in that process, there people have a lot of different comments to that. Many think it's not their role. Yeah, they have nothing to, this is the role of the school, this is the role of the teachers. I don't want to intervene, I don't want to interfere, and the teachers will not like that kind of interference. Many of them also say, I don't know how to do that, and how can you ask something like that of me? Many of them just say, well, assessment is the teacher's task and it has nothing to do with us. And they also think that the children or the learner should not be involved in that. They're also afraid that children might be overwhelmed with these kind of requests. And I think as a general remark, I would say there's a lack of imagination of how this could work. So how we could probably do these kind of things if people don't see themselves as part of assessment process, if they think that children would not be able to participate and that the teachers would not accept that, I get to how could we convince them? So one of the things would be showing examples. And I think the book that Marty presented to you in the first statement today would be great. Yeah. Also what has been mentioned, presenting of scientific evidence that actually, yes, formative assessment can be as successful as summative assessment. I think that is also an important point. Involving them in the research to show them how things are done and how things come about. I think that is also a very important thing. And then involve them in the process of designing that assessment, asking them of what they think would work, how this could be working. And I think the last talk before me was very clear on the peer learning methods and how this could be done. So I'm not going to go into this. I think we have had a lot of details. Oops, nope. So the key suggestions that I would have here from IPA is that it would be necessary to develop a holistic concept. Yeah, not an either or approach, because this is sometimes what we hear from policymakers. It's either formative or summative. It's either this or that. And to tell people that it's not an either or approach. There can be different ways of doing that, and they can be integrative. To take the time to discuss this with people and to make the necessary adjustment gradually. I mentioned in the, yes, I'm just finished. I mentioned in the breakout room that starting with primary school is probably a good way, because their parents are still more flexible and more open, and then to gradually go and extend that to other levels. I think that would be a way of how you can get people used to that and to take them on board with you. I mentioned in the breakout room that my children who went to the French school while we were living abroad, in the primary school, they had this system of having the learning outcomes mentioned, and then with the learning outcomes, they could, they were not graded, but they were judged as acquired, still under acquiring, and not acquired, which gave parents a much better overview of what their children were actually able to do and where they still had a need to improve. And I think that is something that we can make people understand, and that they will probably also be more willing to accept. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was really a very interesting talk about how parents could be part of the whole process of assessment and what role parents can take, but also what are the worries of parents, but also maybe what are the worries of the teachers on the other hand. So if I want to briefly sum up what we have had a number of common points that I'd like to just point out before I open the panel.
Super.
So one of the key points was actually that students should have ownership of their own learning. I think that's where all the panelists agreed, and that formative assessment can offer a possibility to increase that ownership of learning. In our breakout room, we also talked about the very important element, and Bhavani mentioned that too, of meta recognition. So developing an awareness of one's own learning, but also the agreement, there has to be an agreement on what constitutes good work. And I think that's what Aya said, so that writing down what is expected to be, what are the criteria, or what is the outcome, what should the outcome be. And finally, another point that I found very interesting was that students and teachers, I would say, would also have to learn, or should master the feedback literacy, being able to give actually meaningful feedback, not feedback like good job, well done, which is not really a very constructive feedback. Right, so I would like to open the floor for questions now from of our participants. If there are no questions, I have also I've written down a number of questions as the talks were going on. But I would like to give first maybe some members of the audience the opportunity to ask questions. You can do that in the chat, or you can also raise your hand, right, Alice?
Yes, correct. And I saw a hand being raised. I need to find it. Christina Nystrom.
Yes, thank you.
Yes.
Thank you all three for really interesting presentations, and I will definitely see if I can find that book. But my question concerns the teachers. In my experience, teachers often find formative assessment to be much more strenuous and involving a lot more work than summative assessment. And I don't know what your experiences or thoughts are on that matter.
Who would like to answer? Bhavani?
Yeah, sure. I think even though I'm sure you are coming from, school perspective, I'm looking at it from, higher education perspective. We always think of it as an investment, even though it may be strenuous, it may be time consuming, it may be taking effort consuming, but once we have a collection of good practices, as Marty has come up with that book, there are a lot of good practices. We could use those practices to really to reduce staff workload, which is becoming a big issue currently, even whether it is schools or higher education institutions, workload is becoming too much. But we could use this exemplars or good practices and use that as a formative assessment. That to me is a good way to go. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. Yeah.
I would also like to reflect on back on this, Christina, because that was, of course, when we collected these practices, that was also one of the questions, and that just also that it's not misunderstood. This book is actually to inspire teachers and schools, and that you see so these are not methodological guides, but we saw it with the practices that it can really be realized doing this if there is also a kind of nurturing surrounding, with which I mean an openness from school leadership. It's not only the courage of the teacher, because you need the courage of the teacher very much, but that it's such a an interesting thing. You need the school, you need your colleagues, you need the parents. So that it is much more than just, I'm going to do formative assessment. But you can start small, I think, as well. And just one more idea or one more thought, which I got from Yolene in the working group earlier, which was that she said, well, maybe I experienced good assessment practices, but they might be the ones from which I didn't know that I was being assessed. So that's also with parents too, you see the grades that your child gets or a written report, but this is a dialogue in the schoolroom. So maybe it's possible to start really small and just look at the child and start dialogues with parents and children.
I think, Aya, you also raised your hand.
Yes, thank you very much. I think what is very frustrating for teachers very often is this is not a holistic approach. So the stakeholders are not taken on board, and then they take all this time and effort, make the effort and really write good descriptions and invest in formative assessment. And then the parents come and say, and what would that be in grades? Yeah, and how does that translate to what I know? Yeah, and then they think, well, I've spent hours and time in doing this, and then it all goes back to this question, you know. So that's why I think it's so important to have everybody on board and to make people understand how everybody can benefit from those formative assessments and the descriptions and so on. Because if not, then it's just an intellectual exercise. And I totally agree with the teachers who say, well, I could invest that time better into the teaching of the children, you know. And we need to avoid that, because that doesn't make sense then.
Thank you so much for those comments. I appreciate it.
Do we have any other questions or comments from the participants?
I don't see any other hand raised so far. Maybe you can ask one of your questions so participants can think about it. I think we have time for a couple.
Yeah, definitely. So obviously I'm coming also from the teacher side, and I myself in that situation where I have on the one hand the ideal of formative assessment, whereas on the other hand I have the constraints, the core set, if you want, of the summative assessment. So my personal solution is I'm trying to use formative assessment to prepare students for the summative assessment. Would you see that there is, and I think something that Aya mentioned before, is that something that you say we can, that is combinable? Because you were also talking about stakeholders, and parents, of course, are stakeholders. And as you say, they want their children to go on to universities or to have a job training. And there, in the end, grades do count. So how can we cope with that, still with that culture that is still putting a lot of emphasis on grades, on number grades or letter grades? And how do we encourage our students to also accept just comments as feedback? Because I sometimes see that students are also not looking at my comments that I write on the side, but they first look at the grade, really. Yeah, because you raised your hand, right?
Yes, thank you. Well, that's why I said it has to be a gradual process. Yeah, you cannot change such a rather ancient system, I would say, from one day to the next. Yeah, and you cannot throw people into cold water and say, go ahead and swim. Yeah, so it has to be a gradual process, and there might be setbacks also. I mean, this is what we do in a lifelong learning process. Not everything will work immediately and to the extent that we want, and maybe that's a good thing to show to people. Well, we are doing this, and we are improving. Yeah, as we are going. That's why I also think you could start maybe in a country with a few pilot schools. Yeah, and then you can show that to others and can say, okay, look, this is working here, yeah, and then engage the teachers, engage the parents, and as I said, start from the primary school, because their parents are usually more open and more flexible, and then you can gradually extend that into whatever you call it, middle school, secondary one, however your system works, yeah, for the I would say the range of 10 to 14, and then you go further on, yeah, because one of the, as I said in my talk, one of the biggest complaints, I can't say, but issues that parents have is, well, if we do all that in school and then they go to higher education and then all of a sudden this is all different, yeah, so it has to match, yeah, and it has to be a gradual change of system, and it has to be a mind shift in society, and that we all know is the most difficult to achieve, yeah. I mean, we see that with climate change, everybody wants to save the climate, but then when you talk to them and say, well, why do you do this, or why don't you do this in another way? Oh, no, not me. Yeah. So I think that is a problem that we have here as well. That's why I said it has to be a decision that is taken in common together. And then you can start doing it first in one school, then in the next school, then you can probably get other schools on board. And you also have, of course, to have the backup from authority, whether it's your ministry or regional or whatever authority you're working with. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I think Marty, you want to add something?
First of all, I very much agree with Daria that it won't change by tomorrow. However, you do have, as we also said, good practices. I will also say about one with a university-related one. But first, I would also just like to take away this idea that summative assessment is, by definition, a bad thing. I mean, if you want to assess some kind of learning outcomes, you mentioned while earlier learning outcomes, but I think that the problem is also that it's not really connected to the individual children, of course, because they might be on that level at a different point in their development. So if you see it more as a way, that's much better. And also personal experience that I got written reports from for my children in primary school, which I loved. They touched me as a parent. And then just one more thing that I mentioned, and that's also in our book, actually in Denmark, the written secondary school, end of secondary school report from Waldorf schools is accepted as university entrance without grades. So there are these steps, there are these, and if we show that, then that's, those are, as you said, Arya, like pilots who can lead the way a bit. Yeah, okay, thank you.
Thank you. And I think Bhavani, you also wanted to add something?
Yeah, I just wanted to add one quick thing. As Arya, you introduced a lot of interesting learnings and topics. Cultural shift is something that it's, as you all know, that it's not going to happen overnight. It takes a very long time. In a way, I think formative assessment, without formative assessment, learning is very difficult to happen, right? Therefore, even if parents are not completely on board, they are more interested in summative assessment. That's where they can see where students are going. Somehow I feel the educating parents is critical. Extensive scholars, scholarship and research tells us without formative assessment, learning is difficult, because it's by the time you give summative assessment, it's too late to, change, correct their mistakes. So I'm just wondering, whether there is something that one could do in terms of educating parents, highlighting the scientific, providing some scientific evidences why formative is important.
I think that's very interesting, because I think it's important to have parents on board, because otherwise it will be very difficult for educators to work on the formative assessment. There's one last question I have, unless someone else has a question. No?
Yes,
there's a question in the chat.
Okay. So I can see there's a question from Alessandro, and he's asking, is the purpose of assessment in education changing and formative assessment is supporting this shift? Or formative assessment should aim to complement or innovate the summative one?
Very good question.
Who feels ready to answer this question? Bhavani?
I can just start with it. There are 3 reasons why we assess. One is for, getting the certification. Second one is lifelong learning. Third one is the, correcting mistakes over time, So it has to be a complement. It needs to complement each other. We can't fully focus on formative where you're not able to assess students' certification, what level they have achieved at different points in time. It needs to complement, and it can be innovative as well. Innovative assessments are becoming very, very engaging. Authentic assessments will really help students to deal with the real life problems. So that's my take on that.
Anybody else? Do we have any other questions? I don't see any other questions in the chat. Now, I would like to ask then, the overall theme of the week is the impact of education and its assessment and the impact on learners' well-being. So my question would be, in some ways, of course, formative assessment is also, in some ways, an evaluation, right? We do it differently, we do it with words, but in the end, it is an evaluation of students' work. So how can formative assessment contribute to the well-being of learners? Any thoughts on that? Aya?
Well, I think there are 2 things. It's not only about the evaluation or the feedback that is given to the students that is done in a descriptive way. Yeah. If the marks and the grades are very clear about what they are describing, they might be fine too. But I think formative assessment is much more than that. It is not the single or multiple choice test or the 1-point test where you have to know it all. Yeah, this kind of exam where you make it or you fail, and that is decisive for I don't know what. Yeah, we heard the other day about the high stakes school leaving exam in Ireland that really decide on whether you make it or you fail, whether it decides on your future career and practically on your future life. So that is extremely stressful and probably not very helpful. Yeah, and actually it tests only who can cope well with tests and who cannot. Yeah, more than it tests the knowledge of students probably. So that is one thing. The other thing is that formative assessment has this great advantage that if you, for example, you do a project or you do a portfolio or whatever it is, that it is a process. It is not a one-off exam where you have to be all present, you have to be at your best at that very moment. Yes, that can also be because if you prepare for a theater performance, you want to be at your best at the moment you perform and not only during rehearsals. Yeah, but it is a process, and it's the process that is described and evaluated. And it takes into account where each child started from and where it got at the end of the process. And I think that makes such a difference because it really connects to the single individual person. Yeah, and whereas the mark is just a mark in between, yeah, how am I doing amongst my peers or amongst the nation peers of my age or whatever. Yeah, so it is not a personal feedback, and that's also why it's difficult to improve on that feedback. What does it tell me if I have a 4 in math? Well, there are certain things that I didn't know. Well, How do I improve? What are these things? What happened here? Maybe I just had a bad day, you know, and it doesn't tell me anything. So that, I think, is the crucial point about the formative assessment.
So I think, Marty, you also want to, you nodded. There were many things that you...
Yes. So I won't cover those, which already were said by Arya. Just one thing to add to everything that she said. I totally agree. But that's why also this whole idea of dialogue with children, and also especially at the first half of the school life, also with parents, definitely also later. But the level of this changes as the children get older. But dialogue, being taken seriously, having the feeling that you are seen as a person, as a unique person, that gives it all. And then it doesn't matter if it's a state requirement that you hang marks on this, then that's okay if that mark is explained and it is a result of a dialogue. I think that is, and another thing, parents always want to see happy children at school, but that's not the goal. So we want resilient, strong adults who will be able to face a lot in the future.
Thank you. And Bhavani, you also have something to add?
Yeah, I just will, put it very shortly. Forward-looking feedback that helps students to, take corrective actions. That is key thing. As Marty and Arya mentioned, dialogic feedback, because sometimes they don't even understand what teachers are telling. They can't unpack the content of the feedback. Formative assessment is nothing but feedback, right? So somehow the dialogic feedback is so powerful in clarifying what you are trying to tell. Students sometimes don't understand. Third point around well-being, students, I've seen in my daughter at times feel so stressed out because the feedback is not clear, and sometimes she doesn't receive feedback. It just grades without feedback, written feedback on how to improve, where to improve. It's as good as not giving anything. So the well-being of students, we need to make sure it invokes very different types of emotions, especially feedback. So as teachers, we have to be extremely careful about how we are communicating, so that students' well-being is not, sometimes students tell, even higher education students tell, it's so demoralizing. The feedback given is so demoralizing. I even want to, withdraw from my course, So we have to be aware of all these things. I will stop it here.
Thank you. And of course, we are looking at the feedback from the learner side, but feedback is also, formative assessment is a very important tool for teachers for their planning. If we are really, and that's something that you mentioned, Bhavani, the forward-looking feedback, because teachers should be given feedback also for students to actually move on, right? Summative feedback is mostly backward-looking, whereas formative feedback is more forward-looking. And I think that is also something that teachers should have in mind, and that can be a very powerful tool. Right. Hang on, I'm just looking at more questions. Okay, so if there are no more questions, I would like to conclude today's session. I would like to thank our panelists for being there, for giving very, very interesting and thoughtful contributions. I learned a lot today, and I found it very interesting to see also the different perspectives coming from the Steiner perspective, but also the parents' perspective, and then also the perspective of peer learning. I would like to thank also the participants of today's webinar for being there, for waiting until the end, and for asking and contributing to our panel discussion. Thank you very much, and I wish you all a nice evening.